Right now, like somewhere in a corporate boardroom, executives are legally fighting to extend their monopoly on a drug that makes $50 million. Not a year, not a month. I mean, $50 million a day. Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah, it's a completely staggering number when you really think about it.
It really is. Today, we're opening up a massive stack of sources to uncover the hidden reality of the global pharmaceutical machine. Because as of 2025, we're looking at a $1.6 trillion market.
Right, 1.6 trillion.
And when you open your medicine cabinet, it's easy to just see, a plastic bottle or a simple blister pack. You pop a pill, you feel better. But what you're actually holding in your hand is the end result of this invisible high-stakes tug of war.
Absolutely. To wrap your head around that $1.6 trillion figure, we really have to look at the underlying engines driving it. We're dealing with globally aging populations and an increasing burden of chronic diseases.
Right.
And that's meeting truly revolutionary science. Like, take the new GLP-1 drugs for metabolic diseases, diabetes and obesity.
The ones everyone is talking about right now.
Exactly. They work by mimicking a hormone in your gut that delays gastric emptying. It basically signals to your brain that you are full. That one biological hack is expected to generate over $70 billion in 2025 alone.
Oh, wow. Just that one type of drug.
Yeah. And then you also have oncology breakthroughs, right? Like immunotherapies that literally reprogram your own immune system to hunt down cancer cells. I mean, the science is fundamentally changing what it means to be sick.
Which is incredible. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the hidden mechanics behind that science. We are going to look at how these drugs actually get discovered, the fierce legal battles fought to protect them, and the pharmacy middlemen who ultimately control whether you get access to them at all.
Not to mention the sweeping new laws rewriting the rules all over the globe.
Right, exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand why drugs cost what they do, we first have to understand the grueling obstacle course involved in making just one.
Yeah, the traditional drug development model is, well, it's essentially a financial marathon where almost everyone collapses before the finish line.
That sounds brutal.
It is. Bringing a single successful drug to market takes a timeline of 10 to 15 years. You've got a discovery phase, preclinical research on animals or human cells, and then 3 massive, highly regulated phases of human clinical trials.
Just to prove it won't harm patients and, actually does what it claims to do. That is a huge chunk of a human life just waiting for a drug to go from an idea on a whiteboard to a pharmacy shelf.
It really is. And it requires an average of $2.23 billion of capital risked up front for just one successful asset.
Wait, $2.2 billion just for one drug?
Yeah. And when you factor in that the success rate for a drug reaching the approval stage is less than 10%, the pressure on that single winner to pay for all the failures is immense.
I mean, you're spending billions on failures just to find the one success.
Exactly. Investors demand astronomical returns when a drug actually survives that gauntlet. Traditionally, this was manual trial and error, right? Testing millions of chemical compounds in a lab to see what sticks to a disease target.
But now, according to our sources, we're seeing a massive shift to predictive AI design, right?
Oh, absolutely. Companies are using generative AI to design new molecules with predefined properties. The software can predict how a molecule will fold, behave, and interact with biological targets before anyone even puts on a lab coat.
That's wild. And the data suggests this AI paradigm shift can reduce early research and development timelines by up to 50%. Saving years off the early process saves hundreds of millions of dollars before clinical trials even begin.
It's a huge efficiency game.
But wait, I'm hung up on this 50% time-saving stat for AI. If generative AI can literally hallucinate a new working molecule in seconds, why isn't R&D virtually free now? Like, what is the AI actually failing to do?
Well, the thing is, AI models are entirely bottlenecked by the data they are trained on. A major hurdle detailed in the research is dataset representation.
Meaning the data is biased.
Essentially, yeah. In dermatology, for instance, diagnostic and targeting algorithms trained predominantly on datasets featuring light-skinned patients have shown significantly lower accuracy when evaluating people with dark skin.
Oh, wow. So if a predictive AI tool is guiding drug targeting based on a genetically narrow dataset, the resulting molecule might fail completely in a diverse human trial.
Right. It creates dangerous blind spots. The ultimate goal of this AI integration is hyper-personalized medicine, like tailoring treatments to a patient's specific genetic makeup.
Which sounds great on paper.
It does, but executing that requires ingesting massive amounts of highly sensitive genomic data. The more centralized DNA data a company holds to train its AI, the bigger a target it becomes for cyber attacks.
Yeah, we saw a stark example of this in 2023 with a data breach at the genetics company 23andMe. That breach compromised the information of 6.9 million users.
Exactly. Building global pharmaceutical models on vast repositories of personal DNA turns cybersecurity into a literal biological imperative. Protecting that data is a monumental challenge the industry is still struggling to solve.
Okay, so if an AI model actually survives the skewed data and the cyber threats and spits out a working drug, the clock is already ticking. They've burned millions or billions, and they have to lock down the commercial rights immediately.
Which plunges us right into the wild, high-stakes world of patent law. The sources highlight a critical dynamic here known as the 20-year illusion.
The 20-year illusion. Break that down for us.
Well, by law in the United States, a patent grants a 20-year monopoly from the date it is filed. But clinical trials and the FDA regulatory review process consume a massive portion of that time.
So it's like a 20-year timer starts ticking the moment you sketch the blueprint, not when you actually finish building and selling the house. You lose half your time just getting the government permits to break ground.
That's a perfect analogy because that patent clock starts during the early discovery phase, often before the drug even enters human testing. The effective patent life is severely shortened.
Right.
By the time a drug hits pharmacy shelves, the actual commercial window a company has to sell the drug exclusively is usually only 7 to 12 years.
And the moment that core patent expires, they face the patent cliff, where generic competitors flood the market and revenue can evaporate by 90% in a matter of months.
Exactly. So to survive the cliff, companies construct a patent thicket.
A patent thicket. It's like patenting the concept of a car and then filing separate patents for the steering wheel, the rubber on the tires, and the exact angle of the windshield.
Yes. Even if the main car patent expires, no one can build a competing vehicle without infringing on the windshield patent. The ultimate case study for this strategy is AbbVie's drug Humira.
Humira. That was the top-selling drug in the world for years, right? Treating autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease.
Right. AbbVie didn't rely on just the core molecule patent. They filed over 250 patent applications and secured over 130 granted patents.
Wait, over 130 patents for one drug?
Yep. They patented specific formulations, the dosage forms, and even the highly specific manufacturing processes required to make the drug.
And the primary patent for Humira actually expired in 2016. But because of that dense web of 130 secondary patents, AbbVie was able to force competitors into endless litigation.
Exactly. Every major competitor eventually chose to settle rather than fight through the thicket. This legally delayed competitors from entering the U.S. market until 2023.
A 7-year delay beyond the primary patent expiration, and research shows this delay cost the U.S. healthcare system an estimated $80 to $100 billion.
Which is just staggering.
It is. During that extended monopoly period, Humira was generating roughly $50 million a day in revenue. The legal fees required to maintain that thicket are a microscopic expense compared to the revenue they retained.
Pfizer pulled a similar maneuver with Lipitor, which had peak annual sales of $12.9 billion. As their patent was expiring, they executed the 180-day war.
They didn't just surrender the market to generics, right?
No, they launched their own authorized generic,
So by the time the generic version of the old drug finally gets approved, the market has moved on. The generic becomes obsolete on arrival.
Precisely. But eventually, even the densest patent thicket breaks, and the product topping runs out of runway. The legal walls fall.
You would think the arrival of generic competitors creates a free market utopia where prices plummet and everyone gets cheap access to medicine.
You'd think so, but healthcare rarely obeys normal consumer logic. To understand this phase, we have to look at what happened when the Humira competitors finally launched in the U.S. in 2023.
These competitors are called biosimilars, right?
Yes. Unlike traditional small molecule chemical pills, which are relatively easy to copy, like mixing baking soda and vinegar biologics like Humira, are massive complex proteins grown in living cells.
It is more like brewing a highly specific batch of beer. You can't make an exact generic copy. You can only make something highly similar.
Exactly. So when nearly a dozen biosimilars finally entered the market, they offered wholesale discounts of over 80% off the original price of Humira.
Wait, an 80% discount? In any normal consumer market, an 80% drop in price triggers an overnight monopoly. Everyone looking at those numbers would switch immediately.
You would think. But by the end of 2023, after a full year of availability, Those heavily discounted biosimilars had captured less than 3% of the total market uptake.
Less than 3%. Over 97% of prescriptions were still being written for the massively expensive branded Humira. That makes zero economic sense for the patient.
Well, the patient isn't the one making the choice here. The answer lies with the invisible middlemen of the pharmaceutical world, pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs.
Right, the PBMs. These entities negotiate with drug makers on behalf of health insurers. They dictate the formulary, which is the master list of which drugs your insurance will actually cover.
And in the US, the three largest PBMs control about 80% of all prescriptions dispensed. They intentionally kept the expensive reference product on their preferred formularies, locking out the cheaper biosimilars.
But to understand why a PBM would block an 80% off drug, you really have to look at the math of the rebate system.
Exactly. Manufacturers pay PBMs a rebate, a percentage cut, just to get placed on that formulary list.
So if a PBM gets a 40% rebate on a $10,000 brand name drug, they keep a massive chunk of that $4,000.
Right. And if they negotiate a 10% rebate on a $1,000 biosimilar, they only get a slice of $100. The math heavily incentivizes them to keep the $10,000 drug on your insurance plan.
Even if the low-priced drug is fundamentally cheaper for the overall healthcare system, the PBM's revenue stream is tied to those massive rebate dollars. The cheaper biosimilars were functionally locked out because the middlemen couldn't afford to save the system money.
But in April 2024, the game changed abruptly. CVS Health, which owns CVS Caremark, one of the massive PBMs, dropped Humira from their formulary entirely.
Oh, wow. What do they prefer instead?
They preferred a biosimilar brand called Hyrimoz and another called Cordavis. But here's the catch. Cordavis is not an independent biosimilar. It is CVS's own private label biosimilar.
Wait, their own label.
Yeah. They partnered directly with the manufacturer to distribute it under their own brand. And because CVS controls the formulary, Cordavis captured 15% of the total market in just 2 months.
That is wild. And Express Scripts, another major PBM, announced they would prefer their own private label biosimilars through a subsidiary called Quallent.
Yep. OptumRx, the third major player, followed suit with their private label Nuvela.
So by January 2025, when the first biosimilars launched for another major drug called ustekinumab, the PBMs immediately covered their private label versions of that biosimilar. The middlemen stopped just collecting rebates and transformed into distributors.
Essentially selling their own private label versions of the drug to the patients they manage. Analyzing this from the sources, it creates a fascinating duality.
Also,
Well, on one hand, it finally broke the AbbVie monopoly. The private label strategy caused a rapid shift in market share, achieving in 2 months what independent competitors couldn't do in a year. Biosimilars were finally reaching patients. However, it creates a massive structural conflict of interest. The PBMs, who are supposed to objectively evaluate which drugs offer the best clinical and economic value, are now financially benefiting directly from dispensing their own products.
so out of 14 biosimilar brands available, the independent makers without these exclusive PBM contracts have been left fighting over crumbs.
Exactly. And if independent manufacturers can't secure market access, they can't recoup the massive investment required to brew these complex biologics.
Which means if companies stop investing in making biosimilars because they know the PBMs control all the access, competition dries up, and long-term healthcare savings disappear completely.
Governments are observing these corporate middlemen and patent thickets dominating the market, though, and they are stepping in with aggressive new policies. We are seeing massive global tectonics shifting the ground beneath this $1.6 trillion machine.
In the United States, a major legislative intervention came with the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA. Now, looking strictly at the mechanics of the law, the IRA grants the government's Medicare program the authority to negotiate the prices of certain top-selling medications.
The crucial detail there is the timeline. The law treats different types of drugs entirely differently.
Right. Small molecule drugs, the traditional chemical pills, become eligible for price negotiation 9 years after approval. But biologics, the complex cell-grown drugs, don't face price negotiation until 13 years after approval.
That 4-year discrepancy has had a severe consequence on research and development strategies. Because biologics offer a significantly longer window of pricing protection before government negotiation kicks in, the financial incentives for investors have skewed dramatically.
The sources report that funding for small molecule drug development has declined by 70% since the legislation was enacted.
Yeah, and 75% of venture capital firms plan to divest from small molecule projects entirely. Investors are simply fleeing to the longer monopoly window.
But small molecules still account for the majority of FDA approvals. Crucially, because they are tiny chemical structures, they can easily cross the blood-brain barrier.
Which makes them vital for treating neurological diseases and specific types of oncology.
Exactly. So shrinking the incentive to develop them puts future innovation in those therapeutic areas at severe risk. There is proposed legislation, the EPIC Act expected in March 2025, attempting to equalize this exclusivity period to either 9 or 13 years across the board to restore investment balance.
While the U.S. is highly focused on managing the cost of blockbuster drugs, the European Union is tackling an entirely different crisis. They're focused on the silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, or AMR.
AMR occurs when bacteria mutate and stop responding to existing antibiotics, right?
Yeah. The overuse of antimicrobials means resistance is skyrocketing. The death toll from AMR could rise to 10 million globally per year by 2050. It is already causing 35,000 deaths a year in the EU alone, costing their healthcare systems 1.5 billion euros annually.
The EU is pushing for a 20% reduction in antibiotic consumption by 2030, but they face a glaring economic failure. Pharmaceutical companies have largely stopped developing new antibiotics because they are terrible business.
Yeah, think about it. You take an antibiotic for a week and you are cured. Compare that to a cholesterol statin you take every day for 30 years.
Plus, if a company invents a brilliant new superbug killer, hospitals will lock it in a glass case as a drug of last resort to prevent resistance from building up. You cannot make a return on investment if doctors actively refuse to prescribe your drug.
So to fix this broken market, the EU has proposed a transferable data exclusivity voucher. If a drug developer brings a novel, effective antibiotic to market, the EU grants them an extra year of market protection.
Wait, what makes this a powerful economic lever is the transferability.
Exactly. The developer can apply that extra year of monopoly to a completely different, highly profitable drug in their own portfolio, or they can sell the voucher on the open market to another pharmaceutical company.
Let me get this straight. You cure a lethal superbug, solving a literal public health crisis, and as a reward, the government lets you keep a monopoly on a completely unrelated billion-dollar cancer drug for another year. Or you sell that legal right to the highest bidder.
I mean, it sounds wild, but yes, it is a highly creative mechanism to make antibiotic development financially attractive without requiring direct, upfront public funding.
That is an unprecedented economic lever.
Now, looking at China, the second largest pharmaceutical market in the world, their regulatory approach flips the market dynamics entirely through volume-based procurement, or VBP.
VBP operates like a massive, nationalized, bulk purchasing negotiation for 1 billion people.
Right. The government offers massive exclusive contracts to supply drugs to their public hospital system. In exchange for that guaranteed volume, manufacturers must agree to steep price cuts, often exceeding 50% of the original price.
So they are aggressively slashing the cost of basic generic medicines across the entire country.
By saving billions on standard generic medications, China is deliberately shifting those freed-up funds in their national healthcare budget to pay for innovative biopharmaceutical drugs.
This policy strongly forces local biotech companies to pivot from just manufacturing cheap generic copies to developing novel therapies, intentionally shifting China from a manufacturing hub to a global innovation center.
It's a completely different way to structure the incentives.
So, what does this all mean for the listener? You started this deep dive thinking about a simple plastic bottle. But whether it's a routine antibiotic for a sinus infection, a life-saving immunotherapy for a family member, or a new weight loss injection, the price you pay and the options you have at the pharmacy counter don't just magically appear.
No, they don't. They're the direct result of an invisible tug of war.
It is an incredibly delicate ecosystem. AI innovation is pushing the boundaries of chemical design, while companies weaponize patent math to squeeze every possible dollar out of a discovery to fund the next breakthrough.
PBM profit motives dictate which of those drugs actually reach your hands, and global legislation is attempting to force the entire system to prioritize public health while still rewarding the astronomical financial risks of innovation.
The landscape is constantly shifting under our feet, which brings us to a really fascinating scenario that builds on all these sources. Earlier, we touched on supply chain tracing, specifically a blockchain technology called Easy Tracker being deployed in parts of Asia.
Right, the system that allows patients to scan a simple QR code and get 100% end-to-end transparency of a drug's origin.
Exactly. Verifying it all the way back to the exact manufacturing batch, eliminating the risk of counterfeits.
Okay.
And we also explored how predictive AI is driving the industry toward hyper-personalized medicine, where treatments are designed for a patient's specific genetic footprint.
Yes,
If we collide those two concepts, what if patients of the future could completely bypass the traditional pharmacy middlemen and massive blockbuster brand names?
that is an incredible thought.
Imagine a world where local community cooperatives crowdsource and trace their own custom-printed personalized therapeutics using decentralized blockchain ledgers and AI design. If you know exactly what your specific genome needs and you can trace the chemical printing perfectly on a secure network, you wouldn't need a massive corporate entity telling you what is or isn't on their formulary list.
A system like that could fundamentally collapse the entire $1.6 trillion middleman machine we just spent this time exploring.
You wouldn't just be opening your medicine cabinet, you'd be downloading your cure.